The hum of the black ship is not sound, it is a pressure, a weight that settles behind the eyes and tastes of copper and ash. I remember pressing my hand against the cold adamantine wall of my cell, feeling the vibration of the warp engine through bone, the rhythm like a heartbeat that wasn't mine. We were told we were the chosen, that our suffering was service to the Emperor. But when the lights flickered and the air turned thin and sweet with recycled incense, I began to wonder whether the Emperor's mercy had ever reached this far. The others whispered prayers to the Astronomican through cracked lips, but I could feel the truth beneath the hymns. This ship was not a sanctuary, it was a harvest. Transmit this record to the faithful, that remembrance might shield them when the black ships return. The hum never stops. It threads through the air like a living thing, vibrating behind the eyes until thought itself seems to tremble. Even when I sleep, if the fitful drifting between terror and exhaustion can be called sleep, it finds me there, droning through dreams in low mechanical reverence. I used to think it was the ship's heartbeat, the pulse of the Emperor's will driving us toward Terra. Now, I suspect it is the sound of the void whispering through the cracks of our faith. The walls of my cell glisten with moisture that isn't water. It condenses from the recycled air, slick and warm to the touch, smelling faintly of oil and incense. The lumen strips above flicker in pale yellow intervals, time to remind us of days that no longer exist. Somewhere beyond, boots march in perfect rhythm, sisters of silence, the anointed wardens of our damnation. They move without speech. Their presence felt like a pressure wave pressing against the edges of the mind until thoughts shrink from their path. When they first brought me aboard, I tried to pray. I pressed my forehead to the deck, whispering the canticle of the golden throne through a throat hoarse from weeping. By his light we endure, by his silence we are judged. The words fell apart in my mouth. It is difficult to find meaning when the air tastes of metal and fear, when every cry for mercy is swallowed by bulkhead steel. The others prayed too at first, hundreds of us kneeling shoulder to shoulder in the hold, the air thick with the musk of bodies and the rising pitch of desperation. But the sisters did not look upon us as penitents. To them we were inventory. I remember the first culling. The Vox grill crackled above us, announcing designations, numbers, destinations. The names were meaningless, machine-intoned. When the chosen were led away, they did not return. Some said they had been sanctified for the Astra Telepathica, trained to serve the Imperium's will. Others whispered that they had been fed to the throne. Rumor and hope shared the same breath. Both stank of madness. At night, when the lumens dim to red and the vents hiss, I taste copper on my tongue. I imagine it is the ship bleeding. Sometimes I press my ear against the floor and listen for the sound of the void outside, the nothing that waits beyond the hull. It is silent but not empty. The black ship moves through it like a leviathan through ink. Its holds heavy with souls too bright to be left unbound. The psychers, the cursed, the gifted, the doomed. One of them sits opposite me across the narrow aisle of cages. A woman, perhaps 30, perhaps 60. The warp has a way of erasing such boundaries. Her hair is gone, shaved to the scalp, and her eyes shine with the faint glow of power struggling beneath suppression. When our gazes meet, I feel her mind brush against mine like a moth striking glass. The pain is instant and exquisite, a spike of cold fire that leaves me gasping. She mouths a word I cannot hear, then lowers her head. We are all muzzled here, not by devices but by the sisters' presence. They are nulls. Blessed or cursed with the pariah gene, their very being cancels the warp. When they approach, it feels as though my soul is being flayed from within, each thought dragged through broken glass. Yet part of me hungers for their nearness. When the nulls are close, the whispers recede. The half-heard voices of the immaterium that press constantly against the edge of hearing. I have learned to crave that brief peace even as it strips me bare. There is one sister I have come to recognize by the rhythm of her steps. 3 beats of ceramite, a pause, then one softer tap, perhaps a damaged greave. She passes my cell often, her face hidden behind a bronze mask engraved with the sigil of the Silent Order. Once, when she paused before me, I dared to lift my eyes. For an instant I saw something behind the mask. Something that was not mercy but not entirely indifference either. It was the look of someone who has long forgotten the sound of their own name. Days or cycles blur together. The ration's taste of chalk and promethium residue. Sleep brings no rest. Dreams are intrusions. Sometimes the lumen strips flicker in rhythm with my heartbeat, and I imagine the ship watching me. I whisper to it in the dark, trading fragments of my old life for a scrap of comfort. The ship never answers, but sometimes the hum deepens as if acknowledging my confession. It was during one of those hours, if time even exists here, that the destabilization began. A sudden pitch in the deck plates, a tremor running through the ship like a shiver. The lumen strips flared white, and for the first time the hum faltered. In that heartbeat of silence, every captive froze. It was as though the Emperor himself had drawn breath. Then came the sound, not from the hull, but from within us. A chorus of psychic resonance, hundreds of minds crying out as the warp pressed closer, seeking a crack. I felt it claw at me, eager and familiar, the promise of freedom through annihilation. The sisters moved instantly, their null auras expanding like shock waves, crushing the surge before it could bloom. The agony of being cut off again was almost worse than the incursion itself. I screamed without sound, my throat raw from the effort, my breath turning to steam in the cold. The woman across from me convulsed, her head striking the bars until she went still. When the hum returned steady and low, I realized my face was wet. Not from tears, but from condensation trembling off the ceiling. The ship was sweating with us. The next cycle, half our hold was empty. The cells gaped open, the floor scrubbed clean. No one spoke of it, because to name loss aboard a black ship is to invite it closer. I began counting heartbeats again, but somewhere between the 1,000th and the 10,000th, the rhythm no longer matched the hum. The ship had found a new pulse. I think I know whose it is. It began with the faintest stutter in the vents, as if the ship were clearing its throat to speak a language only the damned could hear. The new pulse rode the old hum, a counterbeat like a second heart hidden beneath deckplate and ritual. When I pressed my palm to the floor, the vibration traveled up my bones in thin metallic threads that tasted like filings on my tongue. I closed my eyes and matched my breathing to it, the way I used to steady myself on the swaying mag rail in the hive, and the rhythm steadied me back. A voice formed out of the tremor, wordless and patient. Not a whisper from the warp. There was no fever to it, no seduction. Only a pattern that seemed to take measure of me as the sisters did, without pity, but with purpose. I had the thought, treacherous and absurd, that the ship was listening. Across from me, the woman with the shaved scalp stirred. Her eyes opened, not glowing now, but dull as river stones, and for a moment I believed she was dead and only her gaze remained. She lifted her hand and drummed 2 fingers gently against the bars, slow and steady, aligning her beat with the same hidden pulse. It ran through us both, a line stretched taut across the gulf of our cages. I mouthed a question I dared not speak. She shaped her reply with lips almost too dry to move. Terra, I think she said. Or error. The distinction felt like sacrilege. They brought water thickened with electrolytes and the ghost of incense, a liquid prayer forced between cracked lips. A servitor slid the tray through chutes that snapped open and shut like metal jaws, and its vox issued the pilgrim's hymn in a voice half corrupted by static. By his light we endure. The word scraped at me. I took the cup and sipped, and the new beat seemed to quicken as if amused by my obedience. I remembered the sister with the faltering grieve and her stillness when she paused before me, the unreadable line of her mask, the way silence has edges, and you only feel them when you lean too close. If there was a second pulse on this ship, I thought it might belong to her. A paradox, the absence at the center of all this noise, lending it shape. The purge came during the false morning, when the lumen strips rose from red to pallid gold, and the Vox grill coughed a series of cold designations. A section number, a hold index, the sound of gates unlocking in a domino cascade. I watched bodies rise, stumble, and fall back. A sister's shadow fell across my cell, and with it the crushing hush that pressed my soul thin. She did not open my gate. Instead, the row beyond mine shuddered awake, bars retracting with hydraulic moans, and the captives within were herded out by silent hands. There were no lashes, no shouts, only the numbing certainty that this was what we were for. The woman across from me stood, hands flat at her sides, ready. Her eyes met mine once more, and I wanted to promise something. Survival, remembrance, anything to resist the eraser's stroke. All I had was a breath, and I gave it as if it mattered. She nodded like a priest receiving an offering and stepped into the corridor. A footfall faltered. 3 beats, a pause, the softer tap. The sister with the damaged greave turned toward me. The bronze mask was etched with the sigil I had memorized during sleepless cycles. An antique purity seal set into the brow, wax cracked, parchment stained with oil. I could not read the script, but I knew the shape of zeal when I saw it. She looked to the woman for half a heartbeat, then to me, as if taking a census of 2 souls no one else had bothered to number separately. I felt the null aura close around my thoughts like cold hands, and, perversely, the relief that followed. The whispers in the corners of the hold died like sparks in water. "I will endure," I said, the words little more than vapor. Not to the sister, to myself, to the humming walls, to whatever patient thing had set its pulse beneath the ships. The line shuffled forward. The servitors watched with dry, clicking patience. The gates clanged shut, and then, a sound that did not belong, the thin skirl of a human laugh, too bright for this place, escaping from the next aisle over. It cut off at once, and I heard the flat thump of a body striking metal. No reprimand followed, no sermon. The ship accepted the interruption, folded it into itself, and resumed. The woman with the shaved scalp disappeared around the corner. I waited for a scream, a blessing, the soft mercy of a final prayer. Nothing came. My cup chimed against the floor with the quiver in my hands. Time broke. It lost its edges and became a smear of breath and heartbeat and the smell of reprocessed air. I counted to anchor myself, then stopped because numbers meant order and there was none. Instead, I started to name the textures of the hum. There was the low, organ-deep drone of engines locked in ritual, the finer, insective buzz of lumen circuits complaining within the walls, the periodic sigh of the Geller field cycling protections I could not see. And now, beneath it all, that second rhythm, neither mechanical nor warp-born, a living metronome that seemed to wait for my acknowledgement. I gave it silently, like a nod across a crowded chapel. The response was not a word, not even a thought, only the subtlest alteration in the pressure behind my eyes, the hint that I had been seen. They penned us tighter after the purge. The spare cells became storage for banded crates marked with the Imperial Aquila, each one locked and stamped with seals I did not recognize. The sisters moved among them like caretakers in a mausoleum, and their silence made the crates feel like coffins built ahead of schedule. Once, when a servitor bumped a stack and a seal cracked with a wet little pop, a thin sweetness threaded the air. I tasted it and thought absurdly of my hive's midwinter cakes. Then the sweetness curdled, and I realized it was embalming reagent. The sisters did not hurry. They simply replaced the seal and stood still until the air processors purred a little harder, and the scent was gone. Ritual has weight here, Even the mistakes are folded into liturgy. On the next cycle, the Vox Grill delivered a litany instead of designations, and every captive straightened by instinct. A human voice, not a machine, spoke the benediction of transit in tones that reminded me of an ecclesiarchy choir boy grown old and tired. By his throne we are measured, by his will we are spent. The words landed like dust on a closed book. I mouthed them anyway. When the line, "Our fear is the tithe we pay," came, I felt the second pulse flare, as if irritated. I imagined a hand laid on a reliquary, holding it shut against eager fingers. I do not know why the image felt true. Faith is a landscape of guesses. Some guesses are knives. The woman did not return. At false night, when the lumens bled back to red, someone began to hum a childhood lullaby, and the tune crashed immediately into the ship's omnipresent drone, a dissonance that made my stomach twist. A fist struck metal. The lullaby died. In the quiet afterward, a different sound rose, the faintest scrape from the ventilation duct above my cage. A careful, measured drawing closer. My eyes tracked to the grate. 2 screws had been turned a fraction. Someone on the other side of the wall exhaled, slow, like a diver adjusting to the pressure of depth. I angled my head, pretending indifference for whatever sensors watched us, and let my gaze slide away. The grate remained patiently ajar to the width of a coin. I told myself I imagined it. I told myself I would not be the kind of fool who reached for a crack in a ship that eats the bold and the weak alike. The second pulse quickened, as if amused by my pretense. I understood then that my small objective, drink the water, wait for the next cycle, avoid notice, had become a different kind of survival. Not just keeping my body intact, but keeping a shape inside my mind that was mine. Not theirs, not the warps, not the ships. I closed my eyes and assembled myself in pieces. My hive block, the soot-scored balcony where I learned to watch the lights of manufactura flare and die. The smell of rust and sweet tea from the corner stall. The weight of my mother's hand on my shoulder the day the black ship's shadow fell over the spires and the tithe sermon began. I rebuilt those fragments in the rhythm of the pulse and found, to my shock, that the memory did not fracture as it usually did beneath the sister's aura. It held. It held because something outside me held with it. In the corridor, 3 steps, a pause, the softer tap. The sister with the damaged greave halted at my gate. The null chill rippled through the air, scraping the warp echoes from the hold like a blade stripping old paint. She looked at the bent corner of my ventilation grate, then at me, and lifted one finger to the mask's lips. Not a warning, not a command. A recognition of a secret that was not hers to break. Her hand lowered. She moved on. The hum swelled, and the second pulse folded itself into it like a blade hidden in cloth. I lay down on the deck and pressed my ear to the floor. And for the first time since I was taken, the cold felt like a kindness. The grate above me whispered again. The coin width gap, an invitation written in steel. Somewhere beyond it, air moved as if a mouth were shaping words it could not afford to speak. I lifted my hand, stopped, and let it fall back to the deck, fingers spread against the trembling metal. The ship answered in its old tongue, the drone of ritual and distance, and beneath it the patient counterbeat of the second heart. The woman had not returned. The crates stood like watchful coffins, and Terra lay somewhere ahead, a word that might also mean error. I counted 3 breaths, and the wordless pressure behind my eyes gathered, expectant, almost companionable. I reached for the grate. The screw turned with the smallest click, a sound lost at once in the ocean of the ship's hum. The screw came loose with a sigh, as if the ship itself exhaled. A puff of stale, colder air spilled through the opening, carrying with it the scent of ozone and something faintly organic, like wet parchment left to rot. I froze, waiting for the soft tread of a sister or the mechanical hiss of a servitor. But the corridor remained still. Only the hum remained, the constant basso rhythm that now felt like breath, the ship breathing with me through me. From the darkness beyond the grate, a whisper emerged, barely a thread of sound, soft enough to be mistaken for memory. It wasn't speech, not yet, but a sequence of deliberate intonations modulated like a litany. I tilted closer. Then from the other side, a pause and a human word. Broken, urgent, listen. The voice was male, roughened by thirst and disuse, its accent foreign even in this place where tongues had been stripped of meaning. "If you can hear me, nod," it said. I did. The voice released a breath, one of relief or disbelief, I couldn't tell. "You're from Hold C? Good, don't speak. Don't even think loudly. They feel it." I wanted to ask who they were, but his warning pressed into me like an iron nail. "There's a pattern," he continued, voice quivering with both fear and something that could almost be faith. "The hum. The pulse beneath it. It's not theirs. It's old. It's watching." He stopped then, as if gauging my reaction through the vent. My mind spiraled. Not theirs. The sisters? The Mechanicus? The Emperor himself? I wanted to demand clarity, but the words caught in my throat. The silence stretched. Then the man spoke again, slower now, as if translating from a language he did not fully understand. "When the hum falters again, when you feel the quiet between beats, that's when it moves. That's when it feeds." I recoiled, forehead striking the bar. "Feeds?" I whispered before I could stop myself. A hiss of static followed, sharp enough to cut. "Quiet," he breathed. "You'll bring them." The word "them" again, that plural shrouded in dread. The vent slotted shut, the screw twisting back as if turned by unseen hands. I was alone once more, but not empty. The hum changed after that, barely, but enough. Once I might have dismissed the difference as imagination, the desperate mind conjuring patterns to survive monotony. But now I heard intervals, subtle rises and falls, as if the ship were forming syllables in a language of pressure and resonance. My pulse followed involuntarily. The rhythm that had been comfort now felt like compulsion, as though the ship's breath had synchronized with my own. Sleep eluded me. The lumens dimmed and brightened without pattern. The recycled air thickened until breathing felt like swallowing dust. I thought of the man in the duct, his unseen face, his whispered terror. Was he real? Or had my mind built him to give shape to fear? The black ships were known to twist perception. Even the faithful faltered beneath the psychic dampeners. But then I remembered the screw, the physical resistance, the cold metal biting my skin. Something had been there. When I awoke, or thought I did, the hum was gone. At first I believed I had gone deaf. The silence was too complete, the kind that makes the body ache for noise. The air pressed inward like a vacuum. Then one by one the captives began to stir. Some whimpered. Others moaned as if the absence of sound itself caused pain. The sisters moved with urgency now, their steps heavy, gestures sharp. For the first time I saw uncertainty in their movements. They were not the architects of this silence, they were afraid of it. And then the noise returned. But it wasn't the same hum. It came from beneath the deck, a groaning like something vast shifting its weight. A second sound rose within it, a resonance too deep to be mechanical. It vibrated through flesh, through marrow, bypassing the ears altogether. I tasted iron again, stronger now, and smelled the copper tang of blood, my own from a trickle escaping my nose. The woman who had once sat opposite me had been taken, yet in that moment I heard her voice echo in my mind. Terra. Or error. The deck buckled slightly underfoot. The sisters took formation, null fields radiating sharp and cold, slicing through the unseen pressure. But the thing beneath the ship or within it pushed back. Every lumen strip flickered. The vox grill above our cells screeched with raw feedback. I saw shapes in the distortion, faces perhaps, or thoughts made visible. The air shimmered as though rippling through heat haze. For an instant I felt weightless, my soul floating just a breath outside my body. Then came the sound, one not made by any engine or weapon. It was the voice of the ship, speaking not in words but in recognition. I knew it. I did not hear it with ears but felt it with everything that was still human in me. It was old, older than the Imperium, older than faith. It was not malevolent, but it was hungry. The sisters reacted at once, moving with the efficiency of ritual violence. Incense burners hissed to life, spilling perfumed smoke across the corridor. The servitors began chanting Binharic prayers in grinding unison. Machine code blended with ecclesiarchal verse. The ship groaned again and the hum reasserted itself, louder this time, fierce and commanding, drowning out all else. When the world steadied, I found myself on the floor, cheek pressed to cold metal. My cell door was open. I did not move, neither did the others. The open gates were not freedom, they were invitation. A test, perhaps. The sister with the damaged greave appeared at the far end of the corridor, her presence collapsing the lingering psychic haze. She stopped before the nearest empty cell, gaze hidden behind her mask. Slowly, she turned her head toward me. "Stay," she said. The word should have been impossible. The sisters do not speak. Their tongues are bound by vow and by gene. Yet I heard it not through air but through the marrow of my bones, resonating from the very hum that surrounded us. Her voice, if it could be called that, was the ship's voice, wearing her shape like a glove. I wanted to respond, to beg for understanding, but the sound died in my throat. She stepped closer, her mask inches from the bars, and for the first time, I saw light flickering behind her visor. Not reflection, but something alive. Gold pale as dawn over the smog of a hive. I felt it reach toward me and the hum deepened in reply. My head filled with a chorus of half-formed syllables, fragments of language too vast for meaning. For one trembling instant I understood. Then it was gone, stripped away like breath in vacuum. The sister turned sharply and walked on. The gate slammed shut. The hum steadied once more. When I finally dared to breathe, the taste of copper had faded, replaced by ash. Somewhere in the ducts above, something moved again, the faintest scrape of a screw turning back into place. I realized then that the silence between hymns had not ended. It had only learned to breathe with me. When the hum steadied again, it felt different, colder, sharper, as if something within it had been cauterized. The silence no longer carried emptiness. It carried memory. The sister's voice, if voice it was, still clung to the edges of my thoughts, a vibration too deep to forget. I wanted to believe she had spared me, that her command to stay was mercy rather than strategy. But aboard a black ship, mercy is a malfunction, and malfunctions do not last long. We were moved soon after. Servitors clanked through the corridors, unlocking cages in perfect sequence. No words, no instruction, only motion. The captives rose in near unison, as if the hum itself had replaced will. My legs trembled from disuse, and when I tried to stand, pain flared like static through my knees. I gripped the bars for balance. One of the sisters, tall, armor immaculate, face unreadable, lifted a hand and the air thickened. A psychic dampener field blossomed outward, and every trace of thought became heavy as lead. I could not remember my name, only that I must move. The corridors beyond the cells were lit by lumen channels that pulsed with steady radiance, their light refracted through layers of incense smoke. The smell was both holy and suffocating. Every few meters we passed the still forms of statues, custodians of purity or perhaps something else entirely. Upon closer glance, I saw the statues were not stone at all but failed psychers, entombed in life-preserving stasis fields, their eyes open but unseeing. The ship's choir, I realized, not voices in prayer but living instruments. Their lips were cracked, their faces etched with the glassy sheen of souls pressed thin against null fields. We were led into a vast chamber, a cathedral of machinery. Its walls were ribbed with pipes that exhaled pale vapor, and its ceiling arched so high it vanished into shadow. At the far end stood an altar of metal and cables, flanked by two massive servitors whose torsos were fused to the machinery they tended. A series of iron chairs, each fitted with restraints and psi hoods, formed a semicircle before it. That was where the Chosen went, one by one. The air crackled with suppressed power. The scent of ozone and sanctified oil was thick enough to sting the eyes. The sisters arranged us wordlessly. When they moved, it was with choreographed precision, gestures that resembled liturgy more than command. The hum in the floor aligned with their rhythm, as though the ship were breathing through them. I saw one captive collapse, hands clawing at his skull as if trying to hold his mind inside. Two sisters stepped forward and touched his temples with their gauntlets. His body stilled, but the smell that followed, a faint burning like meat left too long on a power grill, told me the price. When my turn came, I tried not to fight. Resistance only drew notice. They guided me to the iron chair, the cold restraints clamping over wrists and ankles with the sound of a closing reliquary. The psi hood descended, humming faintly as its neural pins bit into scalp and flesh. My breath caught, but I dared not cry out. In the silence I could hear it again, the second pulse, faint but insistent, beneath the machine's whine. It did not come from the ship this time. It came from me. The device activated. For an instant the world inverted. Thought became light. Light became pressure. Pressure became sound. I felt my consciousness expand beyond the confines of my skull. A bloom of color and geometry that my eyes could not see but my soul recognized. I saw others tethered to their own machines, their auras stretching and flickering like dying candles. The sisters moved among us, null auras distorting reality in shimmering halos. And then, I felt it. The warp distant yet near, a current flowing beyond steel and sanctity. It called to me with the voice of home. Familiar and venomous, the echo of every dream I had ever feared. I wanted to reach for it. I wanted to run. But the psi hood tightened, and the machine's hymn surged through my veins, translating terror into obedience. A voice filled the chamber. Not human, not machine, something between. It spoke Binharic phrases, each syllable landing like a nail in the coffin of reason. Psychic thresholds confirmed. Resonance stable. Commence harmonization. The servitors obeyed, adjusting dials and chanting equations that glowed briefly in the air. The hum deepened. Something vast awoke within the ship, not mechanical, spiritual. The air vibrated as though reality itself were being tuned. My mind convulsed under the pressure, caught between silence and song. And then, through the static of pain, I heard it. A choir. It began as a murmur, distant and fractured, like wind moving through broken organ pipes. Then it grew, dozens, hundreds of voices singing in perfect unison without breath or body. The sound passed through me, reshaping thought into resonance. For a moment I understood the purpose. We were the fuel and the harmony both. Our pain was not a byproduct. It was the note itself. I saw images then, not with eyes but with whatever was left of the mind that could still interpret symbols. Vast golden towers, the light of Terra shrouded by smog, the Astronomicon burning bright in the Imperium. A wound in the dark held open by endless sacrifice. The souls of psychers, our souls, feeding that flame so that others might find their way through the void. The realization should have brought comfort. Instead, it hollowed me. The woman who had once sat opposite me appeared in the vision, her eyes glowing brighter than the others. She stood beside a pillar of light, whispering words I could not hear. Her lips formed one syllable again and again. Listen. The word vibrated through my bones until I thought they might shatter. I tried to focus on her, to reach her through the chorus, but the sisters increased the dampening field. The world compressed into silence once more. When the restraints finally released, I fell to the deck. The hum had changed again, less steady, more deliberate, as though it were trying to speak in time with my heartbeat. I tasted blood, realized it was mine, and smiled despite the pain. I was alive. Or something close to it, but not everyone was. Of the dozen captives brought into the chamber, 4 remained breathing. The rest had slumped in their chairs, faces serene, eyes open and empty. The servitors detached their bodies, marking each with a sigil of the Aquila before dragging them into the shadows. There would be no burial. Their souls were already accounted for. One of the sisters, perhaps the same with the damaged greave, approached. She looked down at me, head tilted, as if studying an unfinished engraving. For a moment I thought she might end it. One clean motion, one mercy. Instead she turned away. Her silence felt heavier than words. The chamber doors closed behind them with the sound of finality. The remaining captives, dazed and trembling, began to whisper prayers under their breath. I did not join them. I was still listening, to the hum, to the pulse, to the space between, because now I knew the truth of the hollow choir. They did not sing for salvation. They sang to keep the universe from hearing something worse. They penned us in a smaller antechamber after the harmonization, a spillover hold with walls lined in padded ceramite and prayer etchings worn to ghosts by generations of fingers. The air was cooler here, thin enough that each breath felt earned, and the hum came through the deck like a muted organ note, less a command now than a question. I leaned back against the bulkhead and closed my eyes until the sparks behind my lids stopped forming the faces of the dead. When I opened them, he was already watching me from the opposite corner, gaunt and steady, the lines of his face arranged as if carved for endurance. He had the same stillness as the woman who vanished, no tremor in the hands, no flutter at the eye. A calm that in this place felt like blasphemy. He lifted 2 fingers to the deck between us and tapped once, twice, then rested his palm there as if listening for an answer. The pulse answered anyway, rising a fraction, acknowledging our attention like a tutor pleased to see students look up from the slate. You were in the chairs, he said quietly, mouth barely moving. You heard them. Hollow choir, I said, and the words scraped me raw. We're the harmony. His smile was thin, an expression that had forgotten how to show itself without cracking. Harmony, fuel lock. Name it how you need to stand up again. He slid along the wall until he sat near enough for ordinary voices to get lost in the vent hiss and servo clatter. I'm Merrick, he said. Designation G Delta before they stripped it. I kept the old name because it makes me angrier. The sound of a name startled something warm in me I had not realized was still there. I gave mine in return. It felt like lifting a weight with 2 fingers and finding it lighter than fear said it would be. He nodded as if cataloging a relic. Good, hold on to that. They'll try to file it off again when Terra draws close. I tasted copper and incense, the ship's breath licking the back of my tongue. You were the voice in the vent. Merrick's gaze flicked to the nearest grill, then back. Sometimes I'm brave in the dark, he said. I used to think the ship was the enemy. Then the choir taught me a new word. He tapped the deck again, softer. Counterpoint. He told me in fragments that never lingered long enough to turn into confession, how he had been snatched from a shrine city on a pilgrim route, how the black ship took him on a morning full of bells and banners and unremarkable sunshine. He spoke without sentiment, each fact a cog. They test for resonance and for fracture, he said. How loudly you sing and how cleanly you break. The ones who crumble feed the flame quickest. The ones who hold are harder to portion. We cost more prayers, and why warn me? I asked before I could talk myself out of the question. What do you think I can change? Merrick studied the prayer-scratched wall as if the answer might be written there in the grooves. I don't think you can change the course of a black ship, he said. But I've seen the hum tilt toward you twice now like a dish catching light. And a sister broke her rule for you. He glanced down the corridor where the memory of the damaged Grieve lingered like a footprint. Silence isn't empty. It chooses. I let the deck's vibration climb through my spine. The hum carried that second pulse again, the metronome that wasn't mechanical, and it steadied the nausea rising from the iron chair's memory. If it's choosing, then for what? Maybe for how we break, Merrick said. Some fractures make a clearer note. Servitors clanked to the antechamber threshold, heads pivoting, lenses clacking like teeth. A Vox grill coughed the dry syllables of designations while a sister stepped through the smoke like a verdict. Not the damaged Grieve. This one moved with the flawless poise of a blade balanced on a fingertip. We stood because standing hurt less than the press of her null aura when we hesitated. She walked along our line with an evaluator's patience, pausing now and then to mark a slate with sigils burned in quick strokes. When she reached Merrick, she stopped longer, the bronze mask tilting as if scenting something beneath skin. He did not bow his head. He did not lift it. He held still with that pilgrim's calm that frightened me more than any hysteria could. And in that suspended moment, the hum in the deck synchronized with his breath so precisely, I felt my chest catch to match it. Worthy, the Vox at her shoulder grated, reading her hand signs for the servitors. Telemetry to Overseer, candidate for Astra Telepathica review. Worthy. The word landed between us like an executioner's polished step. Merrick's mouth almost smiled again, but the curve failed before it found meaning. The sister moved on. The Vox named my designation next, then paused, the static filling the gap like foam in a wound. Reassessment pending. The servitor scribed an extra mark beside my sigil, ink drying the color of old altar wine. They took 3 from our line, none of whom would ever see a training hall if the math of this place held true. The worthy went one way, the spent went another. Those like me returned to the edge and were told by silence to wait. The sisters drifted out, and when the hum softened, Merrick let a breath go that sounded like a decision beginning to shape. Reassessment, he said, rolling the word like grit between teeth. You hear that choice? It sounds like a corridor with no lights, I said. He gave one of his small, not quite smiles. Then we'll learn to walk by the hum. A distant impact thudded through the ship, dull and deep, followed by a shiver that made the lumen channels flicker as if their wicks had found a draft. The captives around us flinched, some cringing, others lifting their faces like hounds testing a breeze. The Geller field sang a fractional tone higher for 3 breaths, then settled. I looked at Merrick. He shook his head once, not warp, something else. A new figure appeared in the doorway. A tech priest with half his face replaced by a polished mask of red lacquered metal, mechadendrites whispering like inquisitive serpents. He smelt of sanctified oil and printer ink. He spoke in Binharic, blessed with a thin human harmony, and the words bled into our language by rote of ritual, subsystem reconfiguration, choir modulation, supplemental intake recommended. The phrase made a few captives weep the way a benediction can. His servo arm dipped, imprinting a fresh Aquila seal above the antechamber arch. The wax hissed as it cooled. When the tech priest had gone, Merrick leaned close enough that I could feel the heat coming off his starved frame. A modulation means an opening, he murmured. A seam between notes. If you've ever walked a manufacturum catwalk when the line shifts speed, you know the step you take then decides if you live or if a gear eats your leg. You have a plan, I said, because naming it made the air tighter and more honest. I have a rhythm, he said, and a sister who looks at you the way a historian looks at a blank page. The hum answered with a low swell, and I realized the copper taste was back, brighter now, as if the ship itself had cut its tongue on a secret. Beyond the wall a screw turned half a degree. Air sighed through the vent with careful courtesy. Somewhere on the other side of the ducts I could hear the caution of a masked footfall. 3 beats, a pause, the softer tap. Merrick held out his hand, not to shake, but as if asking the pulse itself to acknowledge contract. I placed my palm against his, and for a single breath the counterbeat lifted us like a promise. Then the lumen strips brightened to surgical white, the doors parted, and the antechamber filled with the scent of sanctified oil and cold. The sister with the damaged greaves stepped in and stilled the air. She looked at me first, then at the vent, then at Merrick. Her hand closed into a fist over her heart plate, a sign I did not know. The hum dropped to a whisper so thin it was almost beautiful. "Now," Merrick said, and the word landed in the silence like a blade set gently on a throat. The command detonated in silence. "Now," Merrick had said, and the hum beneath the deck answered him like a drawn breath held too long. Every lumen guttered. The light shrank to a pulse that matched the rhythm in our veins. The sister with the damaged greave stood perfectly still, as if listening to something beyond her armor. When she moved again, it was not toward us, but toward the far bulkhead. Gauntlet raised, a burst of static leapt from her palm, arcing blue across the sigil-sealed doors. The wax hissed, the iron quaked, and for the first time since my capture, the black ship groaned in pain. Merrick was already moving. He pulled me by the collar toward the service hatch behind the stacked crates, where the air smelled of solvent and burnt copper. The hum no longer comforted, it commanded. It told us where to go. I didn't question how he knew. Questions belonged to the living, and right now we were something else. The hatch slid open just enough for us to slip through before the sister's aura flooded the chamber like winter. Behind us, the captives wailed, voices shredding against the psychic dampeners, and then fell abruptly quiet. I didn't look back. The passage beyond was narrow, a maintenance artery pulsing with power conduits that ran like veins through the ship's belly. Every step reverberated through metal, and the hum followed, rearranging itself into a cadence that felt like a countdown. We ran until breath and gravity blurred, until the only thing left was motion and fear. Merrick's hand was blood-slick from where the servitor's claws had grazed him. He didn't notice. "Keep to the pulse," he said between gasps. "It knows the path." We reached a junction lit by stuttering red lumen strips. A servo skull drifted past, reciting the litany of containment in a child's voice. Its optical lens flickered, found us, and froze. For a single heartbeat, we faced each other, the machine's dead eyes and our living ones, before Merrick struck it with a shard of metal torn from the wall. Sparks spat like dying stars. The skull hit the deck with a sound too loud in that confined space. Somewhere above, alarms began to stir, muffled, uncertain, like dreams of discipline not yet fully awake. We pressed onward, through air that tasted of rust and burned prayers. The hum grew louder here, less like machinery and more like the ship itself was breathing words just below understanding. Every so often a phrase rose from the static. Latin fragments, half liturgical, half mechanical. I caught one clearly as we passed a bulkhead scrawled with devotional graffiti. Lux vinci per consumptionem. Light conquers through consumption. I almost laughed. Of course it did. The corridor widened into a chamber filled with suspended coffins, dozens, maybe hundreds, each a translucent sarcophagus containing a motionless figure. Psychers like us, the hollow choir. Cables entered their spines, mouths open in eternal songless scream. The sound in this place was unbearable. Not noise, but vibration that flayed the inside of the skull. My knees buckled. Merrick caught me before I fell. "Don't listen with your ears," he hissed. "Feel the timing. There's a beat under it, the true rhythm." He was right. Beneath the agony of resonance there was order. The song wasn't random, it was containment. Layers of psychic frequency meant to cage whatever force the ship carried. And that cage was cracking. The pulse beneath it, the same heartbeat that had haunted me since the cells, was rising like something buried alive. In the reflection of a stasis pod, I saw movement, the sister with the damaged greave stepping into the chamber. She had followed. Her mask gleamed gold in the low light, and for an instant, I thought I saw the faintest expression behind it. Not wrath, but sorrow. She walked past the singing coffins, her aura dimming their resonance into brief, merciful silence. When she reached us, she raised her hand again, but not to strike. "Stop running," she said. The words came through the hum, not through sound. They vibrated in bone and memory, resonant and unbearable. Merrick stepped forward, trembling. "You spoke before," he said. "You broke silence," the sister tilted her head. "We all break. That is why we are here." The hum deepened, drowning even thought. The air thickened with pressure, and the stasis pods began to crack. Pale light spilled out, souls burning through containment. The hollow choir screamed, their voices merging into a single note that split the air like lightning. The sister turned toward them, her body rigid, her mask flickering with faint golden veins. "Get out," she said, "before it learns your names." Merrick grabbed my wrist. "Move." The corridor behind us had already begun to warp, metal bending as if under immense heat. From within the song came something else, movement that was neither flesh nor light, shapes unfolding like shadows given substance. I looked back once and saw through the haze a form immense and human-shaped, its outline flickering like a mirage. For an instant I thought I saw wings. Then the lumen strips exploded, plunging everything into gold and red. We ran again, guided not by sight but by rhythm. The hum had become erratic now, a wounded heartbeat struggling to keep time. Somewhere behind us the sister fought not with weapons but with silence itself, her null aura expanding until the song receded like a tide. I wanted to believe she could hold it back. I wanted to believe in anything at all. Merrick stumbled. I pulled him onward. The air turned thin, freezing. At the end of the corridor, a blast door sealed halfway down. Beyond it, I glimpsed the faint shimmer of the ship's outer corridors, the sections reserved for the Adeptus Mechanicus, sacred, dangerous, and possibly our only route away from the choir. The hum urged me forward. "Go," Merrick said, pushing me toward the gap. "You're the one it listens to." I shook my head. "We go together." He smiled again, blood running down his chin like wine. "Counterpoint," he whispered. "One must break for the other to carry the note." Before I could stop him, he turned back, sprinting toward the collapsing chamber. The last thing I heard was his voice joining the choir. Not screaming, not praying, but singing. The sound was terrible and beautiful and gone too soon. I dragged myself through the door as it slammed shut behind me, sealing the chamber in silence once more. For a long time, I just lay there, the hum slow and uneven under my cheek. Then I heard it, a single deliberate beat in reply, almost like a pulse of acknowledgement. The ship knew. It had taken him, but it had left me, and now it wanted something in return. The hum followed me through the dark like a memory that refused to die. It had changed again, no longer mechanical, no longer the pulse of the ship. It beat in sync with my breath, patient and watchful, a living rhythm that wanted to be heard. The air beyond the blast door was colder, cleaner, filled with the scent of sterilized oil and ozone. The corridors here were narrower and more ornate, their walls etched with prayer scripts that glimmered faintly under emergency lumens. I knew this place by rumor even before I read the sigils. Mechanicus Sanctum, the ship's inner circulatory heart where flesh was unwelcome. I pressed my hand to the deck and felt it vibrate beneath my palm, the pulse echoing through metal like a heartbeat beneath a coffin lid. Merrick's voice still lingered somewhere in that vibration, a phantom note folded into the greater song. I tried to push it away, but every time I did, the hum grew louder, filling the hollow spaces he had left behind. I whispered his name as though it might make him smaller, contain him, but it only deepened the resonance. The ship was listening, The passage ahead split into three. To the left, a slope downward where red light pooled like blood in a wound. To the right, a line of sealed hatches marked with cogwheel sigils. Straight ahead, a door unlike the rest, carved from a single slab of ceramite, embossed with the imperial aquila and bound with chains that looked ceremonial rather than secure. The hum tugged me toward it like a tide. I resisted for all of 3 steps before I realized resistance itself made the pain worse. My skull throbbed with each beat. The door wanted me as much as I wanted to not open it. I approached, my breath frosting in the cold air. When I touched the chain, it came apart like mist, the links evaporating into golden motes that drifted upward and vanished into the vents. Behind the door, something exhaled, a deep, patient breath that smelled faintly of dust and sanctity. I stepped inside. The chamber was vast and circular, its walls lined with suspended conduits that pulsed with faint light. In the center stood an altar, not of stone but of flesh and machine combined. Tubes ran from it into the walls like veins. Upon it lay a figure. At first I thought it was another psyker, but as I drew closer I saw the difference. Its skin was translucent, stretched thin over a lattice of copper and bone. The chest rose and fell in slow, measured rhythm. The head was shaved, the face serene. But where the eyes should have been were 2 sockets of softly glowing light. I reached out, compelled by awe or horror or the lingering echo of faith. And when my fingertips brushed its hand, I felt warmth. Real warmth, the kind that hadn't existed since the ship left orbit. A voice bloomed inside my mind, gentle and vast. "You are not meant to be here," I stumbled back. "What are you?" "Remnant." The word carried a gravity that was almost kind. "I keep the course. I sing the correction when the choir falters." I looked around the chamber, the cables, the pulsating conduits, the faint hum that resonated perfectly with the figure's breath. "You're the ship," I whispered. "The ship is larger. I am the memory it keeps." 100 questions collided in my skull, but only one found its way out. "Why me?" The answer came not as words, but as feeling. Recognition, curiosity, a faint ache that might have been pity. "You survived harmonization. Few do. The choir tried to consume you, and the silence saved you. You carry both now. You are discord. And I need discord." The lumens flickered as if to underline the word. Discord. In the rituals of the Mechanicus, that was heresy. A flaw in the pattern, a thing to be excised. But here it sounded almost sacred. "You need me," I said. The choir grows restless. The Geller field trembles. The throne hungers, but the tether weakens. If the song breaks entirely, the light will die in the void. Someone must choose which voices burn and which endure. The chamber shook, a low rumble rolling through the hull. Distantly, I heard screams carried through the ducts, half human, half harmonic. The hollow choir was awakening again. I took a step closer to the altar. "You want me to kill them?" "Not kill. Select. The Emperor's will demands purity, but the Mechanicus demands function. Too many voices and the flame falters. Too few and the void consumes. You are between. You can hear both sides." The glow in the figure's eyes pulsed brighter. "Do you understand what that means?" I thought of Merrick's final smile, of the sister with the damaged greave standing against the song, of the endless hum that had followed me from the moment I was taken. "It means I decide who dies," I said. "It means you decide who sings," the voice corrected softly. "And what is silence?" The chains on the floor stirred, slithering like serpents. The altar's light dimmed. The choir is rising. You must choose before they do. The deck trembled violently, dust falling from the vents in soft clouds. I turned toward the doorway, where the red emergency lights now flickered in frantic rhythm. A shape moved beyond the threshold, a sister limping, the damaged greave dragging slightly. Her mask gleamed in the half-light. "The choir is breaking its cage," she said, her voice clear now, spoken aloud for the first time. "If it breaches the Geller field, we'll all burn in the warp. Whatever you're doing, end it." Behind her, the corridor convulsed with light as something vast pressed against the bulkhead, its form like molten glass and shadow. The sound that followed wasn't a scream. It was music. I looked from the sister to the altar, to the glowing figure that pulsed like a dying star. "Choose," it whispered, and the hum, faithful as ever, answered in kind. The sister's voice hung in the chamber like a blade balanced on its edge. "End it," she said again. And for a moment I thought I could hear something human behind the modulation of her vox. Fear, or conviction, or the tiredness that comes only when faith has run out of words. The air between us vibrated with tension, the hum crawling up the spine of the ship like an animal cornered. Behind her the corridor rippled, bulkheads flexing inward as if the metal itself were trying to breathe. The hollow choir was no longer contained. Their song had turned inward, a scream folding over itself into rhythm, a harmony too perfect to survive. The being on the altar, the remnant, stirred. Its head lifted fractionally, and its luminous eyes dimmed to the pale gold of dusk. "You cannot stop them," it said, "not to her, but to me. Only shape them. Choose the pitch of their fire." The sister advanced, null aura swelling. The weight of it pressed through my skull until thought itself became friction. The hum faltered, lines of force collapsing into silence. She raised her weapon, a sanctified blade whose edge shimmered with distortion where the warp recoiled from its presence. "That thing is no saint," she said. "It's a ghost of code and hunger." Step away, I wanted to obey. The logical part of me, the residue of fear that still believed in hierarchy and ritual, screamed to kneel, to let her purge this heresy and save what could still be called a soul. But the hum inside my veins disagreed. It rose with a defiance that wasn't mine alone. I felt Merrick's note there and the woman's unspoken word, "Listen." They resonated together, a single imperfect chord. "Discord," the remnant whispered. "Use it." The lights flared white. I heard the song again, distant but swelling, and through it the sound of the ship tearing itself apart in slow, melodic agony. I took a step toward the altar. The sister followed, her blade lowering a fraction. "If you touch that thing," she said, "you damn yourself. Do you understand what it feeds?" "I think I do," I said. "Everything." The remnant's eyes brightened. "Not everything." Enough. The ceiling split with a thunderous crack, venting streams of light like the bleeding of a sun. I could see them now, the choir pouring through the fissures like vapor made of memory. Their forms flickered between human and something else entirely. Their faces stretched thin with ecstasy and horror. They did not walk. They drifted, hundreds of them. A storm of luminous shapes circling the chamber and widening gyres. The song was unbearable. So beautiful it scoured thought clean. I fell to my knees, clutching my head. The sister shouted a litany I half recognized, invoking the Emperor's light as her null field expanded outward, pressing the spectral swarm to the edges of the room. For a moment the voices dimmed, then they shifted pitch. A counter-harmony rose, mocking, mirroring, perfect. Her silence met their song, and the air between the two began to burn. I saw the truth of it then. The choir's power wasn't only psychic. It was faith inverted, devotion stripped of humility. They sang not to the Emperor, but as him, or what they thought he should have been. The sound made the remnant shudder, circuits along its chest flashing like distant lightning. "They are becoming what they fear," it said, voice breaking into static. "If they reach the field's heart, the Astronomicon will take them whole." "The flame will change into what?" I demanded. "Into something that listens back." The sister turned on me, mask glinting in the chaos. "Do not listen to it. she cried. It speaks in metaphors. The warp eats meaning and spits out miracles. End it before it learns your name. I looked up at her, at the crack across her greave, the subtle tremor in her stance. She was right, perhaps. The Emperor's will was to preserve, to contain, to burn the impurity that might undo his light. But the hum in my blood told a different truth. If the light demanded endless sacrifice, perhaps the act of listening was the only rebellion left. The remnant reached out, its hand barely more than bone wrapped in conduit. Touch me, it said. I will give you the key. The sister lunged. I caught her blade in both hands. The null field burned through my flesh like ice, numbing thought, freezing blood. My bones sang with pressure. For an instant, her mask was inches from my face, the gold of it reflecting my own eyes, wide and terrified. She tried to speak again, but her words dissolved in the distortion of her aura. I twisted, forcing her off balance, and the blade clattered to the deck. The choir screamed, not in pain but in delight. They had found the rhythm they wanted. The remnant's hand found my wrist, and the world became vibration. I felt every voice in the ship, every heartbeat, every line of scripture ever carved into its hull, all converging into one impossible harmony. The light behind my eyes became infinite. Now you see, it said. Now choose. I saw Terra then. Not the holy cradle of mankind, but a dead star wreathed in prayer. I saw the golden throne consuming psyker after psyker, a furnace of faith without end. And somewhere within that fire a silence waited, immense and patient, longing to be heard. When I opened my eyes, the chamber was gone. The choir had stopped singing. The remnant lay still, its glow extinguished. The sister was on her knees, breathing hard, her mask cracked down the center. Through the gap I saw her eyes for the first time, gray, human, filled with something dangerously close to compassion. "What have you done?" she whispered. I looked at my hands. They glowed faintly, gold and crimson interwoven like threads of two songs tangled into one. The hum had not stopped. It had simply moved inward. I listened, I said. The ship shuddered once and then fell still. The silence that followed was total, deeper than null, deeper than space. It was not absence. It was potential. The sister rose unsteadily, watching me as though trying to decide whether to strike or kneel. "If the choir is silent," she said, "then the Astronomicon will dim. Billions will die lost in the void." "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe it's waiting for a new song." The deck beneath us hummed again, faint and uncertain, like a musician tuning an old instrument. I could feel it through my bones, tentative, exploring. The ship was not dead. It was learning. The sister stepped closer, blade raised again but trembling. "What are you?" I met her gaze, and in that moment the hum aligned perfectly with my heartbeat. "Between," I said. "I am between." Outside, through the fractured walls of the sanctum, the void flared gold as the black ship changed course. Not away from Terra, but toward something beyond it, somewhere the Emperor's light had never reached.